The Nuremberg trials. What happened to those bodies? We're going to find out today. As always, we're just going to go right into it. Let's roll.
The International Military Tribunal, the IMT, convened in the ruined city of Nuremberg on the 20th of November 1945 to sit in judgment on the surviving leaders of Nazi Germany. The trial continued until the 1st of October 1946, when the judgments were handed down. Of the 24 defendants, 11 were sentenced to death by hanging.
You know something a little bit cool too? You see the headphones that everyone's wearing here, obviously back in the 40s. If you don't know, pretty much what those are is just if I'm not mistaken, they're translators. So obviously these are like, you know, there's like freaking 20, 30, 40 different nations here at this tribunal. So there's obviously a whole bunch of different languages. So if I'm not mistaken, every time somebody talks, it all just gets translated into their language, which is actually really cool. It's like the first time this ever was like experimented, and I guess it worked pretty well. But I think that was pretty cool that they were able to do that because of this.
Reichsmarschall Hermann Goring, the most senior German leader placed on trial, was somehow able to commit suicide the night before his execution, using a vial of cyanide smuggled to him in his cell. This will be the subject of a different film in the future. The remaining 10 were all duly hanged by a special team of US Army executioners, using 2 gallows constructed in the Nuremberg Palace of...
And if you don't know, Hermann Goring, it was the head of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force during World War II. He was also I guess like head. I forgot what you would call it. I'm pretty sure it's not chancellor what he was, but he was the head person in charge of Prussia, the biggest pretty much state out of that was in Germany at the time, and he was like, I'm pretty sure, second in command to Hitler. Which, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of times, a lot of people tried to turn Hitler against him because of that fact, and, you know, tried to tell Hitler, you know, that he was gunning for him and all this other stuff. But if I'm not mistaken, he pretty much stayed pretty loyal throughout the whole thing, but, you know, as loyal as he could be anyway. But let's see.
Justice's Gymnasium. They were Wilhelm Keitel, Field Marshal and former chief of the German Armed Forces; Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's foreign minister; Dr. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, SS Obergruppenführer and Chief of the Reich Main Security Office; Alfred Rosenberg, head of the Reich Ministry of the Occupied Eastern Territories and a major National Socialist theorist; Dr. Hans Frank, head of the General Government of Occupied Poland; Wilhelm Frick, Reich Minister of the Interior and then Governor of Occupied Czechoslovakia; Julius Streicher, publisher of the Nazi Party newspaper Der Stürmer; Fritz Sauckel, General Plenipotentiary for Labor Diplomacy.
Yeah, and obviously, if you notice, nobody, like no normal German soldier, obviously, even if they were the ones who were carrying out the orders and actually committing, you know, these horrible acts, they weren't the ones who were put on trial because, again, you know, you gotta think as a conscripted soldier. You know, obviously, a good portion of them had, you know, nationalist pride and all this stuff, and just wanted to prove themselves. But a pretty big portion also really didn't want to do it at all, and was just forced to on the backs of the fact that they could just be executed at any point. You know what I'm saying? Living in this authoritarian government and stuff like that. So I'm sure a lot of it that's why, you know, the normal average German soldier was never put on trial, and obviously because we would have, you know, freaking hundreds of thousands of soldiers on trial, which, you know, that's kind of obviously a little ridiculous. So plus they kind of suffered after the fact with the, you know, occupation of Russia and all that stuff. So that wasn't the easiest, you know, thing. But let's see.
Employment. Alfred Jodl, Colonel General and Chief of the Operations Staff of the Armed Forces High Command; and Arthur Seyss-Inquart, Reich Kommissar of the occupied Netherlands. The executions were botched, resulting in several cases of slow death by strangulation of up to 28 minutes instead of broken necks, and several of the condemned smashed their heads on the trapdoor of one of the gallows as they fell, the opening being too small. Master Sergeant John C. Woods conducted the hangings, assisted by Sergeants Joseph Malta and Billy Ford, all members of the 68th 50th Internal Security Detachment at Nuremberg. Woods was a controversial character, discharged from the U.S. Navy in 1930 after being diagnosed with constitutional psychopathic inferiority. He had falsely claimed hangman experience and was selected as an army executioner during the war, hanging 34 American soldiers in France in 1944-45. Internal reports suggested that Woods bungled at least 11 executions of convicted U.S. service.
Yeah, somebody who obviously takes, because I mean, those pictures of him smiling and stuff like that, somebody who takes a little bit of pride and pleasure in doing what he's doing it would kind of have to be considered a psychopath, you know what I'm saying? Because, I mean, gosh damn, dude, you're taking people's, sons and fathers and brothers away from them, and you're doing it with a smile on your face, you know what I'm saying? You kind of have to be a little psychopathic to do that, but let's see.
During the war, hanging 34 American soldiers in France in 1944-45. Internal reports suggested that Woods bungled at least 11 executions of convicted U.S. servicemen before he arrived at Nuremberg. And this is normally where the story of Nuremberg ends, with the executions on the 16th of October 1946. But what happened to the bodies of the Nazi leaders? What happened to the contents of their cells and their personal property held at Nuremberg? Well, the story of what happened to the bodies was suppressed for years, but in fact a top-secret and rather macabre operation to dispose of them was swiftly enacted by the US Army. After carefully photographing and labeling the bodies at Nuremberg, they were all stripped naked and placed into standard plain wooden coffins. This included the body of Goring, who had cheated the hangman. And this is where things took a turn towards the bizarre.
The only thing I can think of where that was done was either so that nationalist old German soldiers can't get those bodies and bury them properly and stuff like that, or two, so that people who idolize this whole ideology and stuff like that can't go there and pretty much worship the bodies or whatever. That's the only thing I can think of, but I don't know, because it is a little weird. But let's see.
Who had cheated the hangman. And this is where things took a turn towards the bizarre. Each coffin was labelled with a false name, each corpse being given the identity of a fictitious American soldier. For example, Goring became George Munger. On the morning of the 17th of October 1946, the 11 coffins were loaded aboard US Army trucks under the command of a military police battalion that formed part of the Nuremberg Trials Guard Force. A 12th empty coffin was added to the trucks, the reason soon becoming clear. The trucks, escorted by jeeps, left Nuremberg's Palace of Justice early in the morning and drove to Munich, to a huge cemetery called the Ostfriedhof. The trucks pulled up outside the cemetery's crematorium, built in 1929. The crematorium staff were informed that the remains of 12 American soldiers who had been killed in action in 1945 had been recovered from the battlefield. In accordance with their families' wishes, they were to be cremated. The crematorium was surrounded by heavily armed US soldiers, while the cremations were underway, watched over by several.
If anything, too, this just adds to the fact that there's thousands of all these different conspiracy theories that come out of the World War II and stuff like that, and this just adds to it, you know what I'm saying? What really happened to the bodies, or why they really do that, you know what I'm saying? Just stuff like that, where I'm sure the real reason is simple, but obviously it is a weird it is weird that they did it, but, being the American government that led all this, it's kind of not surprising, you know what I'm saying, but let's see.
Families' wishes, they were to be cremated. The crematorium was surrounded by heavily armed US soldiers, while the cremations were underway, watched over by several officers. It took all day to complete the cremations. The ashes of each war criminal was placed into urns, carefully labelled with their false American identities. At the conclusion of the operation, the urns were loaded aboard a truck and driven under escort to U.S. Army Mortuary No. 1 at 25 Heilmannstrasse in Munich, otherwise known as the Villa Oberhummer, the attractive white house of a wealthy textiles manufacturer that had been commandeered by the U.S. Army. Next came the disposal of the ashes. Not far from the villa is the Wenzbach, a small tributary stream of the river Isar that runs through Munich. On the 17th of October, U.S. soldiers took the urns to the Wenzbach and tipped the contents into the water.
From what I'm seeing here is pretty much they just wanted to give these guys no dignity or anything in death, is what or after capture really. Just from once they were captured, they got no dignity, no nothing in death. And I mean, it makes sense because they didn't give that, they didn't give identity to all their, the people that they terrorized and all their, all that. So it kind of makes sense, but just one of those things that's like kind of, I guess, gruesome to see. But what are you gonna do, right?
Then, using axes and their boots, they carefully smashed the urns into fragments and then drove away. Now for the second part of the clean-up operation, disposal of the executed men's possessions. Those who had stood trial in their military uniforms had had those uniforms stripped of all insignia and decorations. Those materials had been placed in storage at Nuremberg. Field Marshal Keitel's medals and decorations, including his Knight's Cross and World War I Iron Crosses, were all destroyed, along with his Field Marshal's baton. Strangely, his 2 golden party badges were retained, though the swastikas were defaced, before being handed over to the finance director of the U.S. occupation zone in Germany for sale to help offset the cost of the executions, which had run to some $4,500. Regarding Colonel General Jodl, all of his decorations and medals were destroyed. Hermann Goring had many decorations and was captured wearing his distinctive neck assemblage of the Grand Cross of the Iron Cross, the Knight's Cross, and the World War I Pour le Mérite, or Blue Max. The Americans destroyed all of these decorations, as well as his World War I Iron Cross First Class. However, Goering's solid gold Nazi Party badge, his diamond-studded Pilot's Observer's badge, and other decorations made from precious metals were denazified by scratching out or otherwise defacing the swastikas before they too were sent to the finance director to be sold, presumably for scrap. However, Goering had many sets of his medals, and copies of his Blue Max, Grand Cross and other decorations were recovered from his train at Berchtesgaden station or looted from his private property and survive in collections around the world today. Although not hanged at Nuremberg, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, former head of the German Navy, received 10 years imprisonment at Nuremberg. His U-boat war badge with diamonds was taken from him.
It's pretty much, now we see what happens to war criminals. They just pretty much get erased from history, which I'm sure is a really daunting and surreal, feeling when you're in those trials, thinking to yourself, like, if I get executed, they're not going to care about me. I mean, it makes sense, though, because, again, these men didn't care about their victims, you know what I'm saying? They committed their crimes with no more remorse, no nothing. They just did it and, treated their victims like they're cattle or ants or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Just, so, makes sense. But it's just one of those things where it's like, damn, you know what I'm saying? But listen.
Its swastika crudely excised, and this was also sent to the finance director as scrap jewellery. Most of the executed had left behind papers, letters, or diaries in their cells. These were gathered up and sorted into categories, though some of this material subsequently disappeared. All uniforms in storage bearing Nazi insignia were burned. All other clothing, personal possessions, and less precious jewellery were turned over to the relatives of the executed, along with any cash up to 1,000 Reichsmarks. All other cash and precious stones went to the finance directorate. One man was missing from the cremations in October 1946. Robert Ley had been head of the German Labour Front under Hitler. The American psychologist at Nuremberg, Dr. Douglas Kelly, thought that Ley was mentally ill, but before further tests could be made, Ley managed to hang himself in his cell on the 24th of October 1945. The body was cremated, but in a bizarre move, Dr. Kelly had Ley's brain smuggled out of the prison for study, and a section of Ley's brain tissue was found among Kelly's papers in 2013, long after he also killed himself in 1958. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share.
Oh,
you can also visit my new
gross. We're going to end it right there. So, yeah, that's really gross that they found that. But I don't know. It's kind of crazy. Obviously that freaking head of labor would have been found guilty because he was using. I'm pretty sure he was the one using Jewish slave labor and all this other stuff. So I mean, you can't really, excuse that. But in any case, so yeah, just one of those things where it's kind of crazy how all that kind of played out. Don't be a war criminal, because yeah, some crazy things will happen to your body. But in case, if you guys like this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and see you guys in another one. I'm out. Say peace out to Winston. I'm out.